On today's Locked On Texans Friday, we close out this week looking at what should the Houston Texans do with veteran Steven Nelson and vet Derek Barnett. We also look at the YouTube comments.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers out there in the Texans world to this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Said with me, your team
every day.
Monday through Friday. If this is your first time watching or listening to the Locked On Texans podcast, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for lending your ear. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. And thank you to all of our returning listeners coming back as we continue to talk Texans here on this Friday. On the other side of the screen, you know who it is. Texans beat reporter, credentialed media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. I'm your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman. On today's show, we will be looking at is keeping Derek Barnett smart. What should the Houston Texans do with Steven Nelson? We'll close off today's show in the YouTube comments. Before we dive into some Texans talk, I do want to let you guys know that our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. As we open up today's show, we look at a couple of things. First and foremost, as we mentioned throughout the week, the Texans have until February 19th to work out some extensions with Sheldon Rankins, Dalton Schultz, Jerry Hughes, Steven Nelson, Derek Barnett, and Kaimi Fairbairn, which will be for him to be 12th. But they have until that date, which is next Monday, or the void dates for those contracts kick in. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these players are not going to return back to this franchise. And I think of those names, Dalton Schultz of the 5 for next Monday, Dalton Schultz is probably the more favorable player to actually return back. But those contracts, if it doesn't get done by the 19th, that triggers a contract void. And what are the contract voids? Well, that money would be allocated to the dead cap, the dead money, which can impact how this team goes about their free agency. So I think for Houston, it does look like the benefit of maybe working out something with the players. A lot of times when you look at situations like these, when you look at the void years, this is when a team prorates a player's contract and add a void year to that contract, which will help them out in that current year. Now it's time to pay the piper. In this case, it's time to pay the players. But of those 5, we're looking at next week. And again, if they do not work out an extension by Monday, which I don't think they will, possibly we'll see how it works out over the weekend, then the allocated money for those void years will go into the dead money for this franchise, which again can impact how they go about free agency because now they have to allocate money for the dead cap. But of those 5 players, we're going to talk about 2 today. Steven Nelson, who played in 90% of this team defensive snaps, and Derek Barnett, who was a very good steal by Nick Caserio, picking him up once the Philadelphia Eagles release him. We kick off today's show looking at Steven Nelson. Cody, what are your thoughts? What should the Houston Texans do with old sweater vest?
I mean, at the end of the day, man, I think it all depends on if you can get Steven Nelson on an affordable deal, because I look at Steven Nelson from the standpoint, look, in the 2 years that he's been here, he has been this team's number 1 cornerback for majority of the time. It wasn't until after Darius Stingley Jr. came back from the hamstring injury the back half of last season where we finally saw Darius Stingley Jr. Take that leap as this team's number 1 cornerback. And even when Steven Nelson stepped aside and was cornerback number 2, he was still pretty productive for this organization, for this team, outside of the 2 games where he was battling the foot injury. When you take a look at Steven Nelson, man, you're talking about a guy who has been a foundational piece for this defense over the last 2 seasons, ever since he got here. John, I don't know about you, but if I was to make a list of the top 10 most impactful players for the Houston Texans over the last 2 years, Steven Nelson is definitely going to be on that list. However, I would like to have Steven Nelson back if he will accept a lesser role, and B, if the money is right. And I say that because, John, I finally started really diving into the draft. I finally started coming around of the idea that I would love to see Derek Stingley Jr. paired with another shutdown corner. And I think this draft has some pretty good corners that the Houston Texans can definitely go out and get. Going back to our conversation on yesterday, pick number 23, I wouldn't be too mad if they do end up drafting a corner with that pick. But John, I look at that and I say that because this team is still fairly young, and I would love to see the Texans pair Derek Stingley Jr. with another shutdown corner where they actually have an opportunity to grow with over the next 2-3 seasons. And that is going to definitely give this Texans defense, especially under the stewardship of Coach DeMeco Ryans, to be one of, if not the top defensive team in the league. Which, by the way, I do want to mention this. To understand how well Steven Nelson has been over these last couple of years, Steven Nelson has ranked number 1 out of this whole entire cornerback group over the last 2 years. In 2023 alone, like I mentioned, when he finally took that step aside and was cornerback number 2, he was second on the team with interceptions with 4, trailing Derek Stingley Jr., and second on the team in pass deflections with 12 as well.
Yeah, I think for Nelson, I would personally like Nelson back. So if you look at Houston's cornerback room for guys that are under contract, it is, and this is no disrespect to any of those athletes who go out there and bust their butt to be in the NFL. This is just, I guess, barbershop talk, but that cornerback room right now, aside from Derek Stingley, stinks. And again, I mean it in the most playfully banterous way, not, attacking on their character, but it is not good. And I'm serious about that. It is not good. It is mediocre in terms of talent wise. You are going to need a guy that you can count on. Do I think Houston should invest into the cornerback room with the number 23 overall pick? I've been banging my head saying that for the past 3 or 4 weeks.
Finally came around.
I definitely think that is a position that could use an upgrade simply because you got some good corners in free agency. I'm an advocate of Kendall Fuller. I don't know what will happen with Jalen Johnson if he'll get tagged in Chicago. Will they tag him and then look to maybe trade him? I don't know, but I think they'd be fools to trade a talent like Jalen Johnson. But there are some talented guys that you can get in this year's free agency. Maybe not necessarily all starters. You may look at some guys that can serve as, maybe in a reserve role, like Dane Jackson from Buffalo, played fairly good for Buffalo this year. You also can look at Keyshawn Nixon from Green Bay. He played fairly well. Maybe you can bring him in as a reserve role, But there are some guys out there that you can definitely pair and maybe look to just strengthen your core, strengthen that unit. But Nelson played fairly well last year, considering what he had to go through. Now, I'm going to take myself out of it, Cody. I want to put you right back in it. Pause. What were some of the behind-the-scenes struggles that Nelson had to deal with last season? Because we talked about the injury, and even with the injury, we saw him go out there, struggle, but perform. I think the Browns game was by far his worst performance, but outside of that, it wasn't just all clean for Nelson. And I think Nelson showed his worth to the franchise, honestly, last year. Also considering that it was a little bit rocky to start the season off.
But John, as I just alluded to everybody already knew about the foot injury, but throughout the whole entire season, Steven Nelson had to battle through a lot of knick-knack injuries, and majority of these injuries that he had to battle through, whether it was a knee, whether it was just an ankle, whatever the case might be, that is just a guy that's entering his ninth season in the league. And that's why, John, I kind of came to this realization because, look, I'm all for Steven Nelson coming back. Once again, he has been phenomenal over the last 2 seasons. However, when I take a look at the fact that he's now 31 years old and almost every single week we was hearing Steven Nelson, battling this injury, battling that injury. Of course, the biggest injury was the foot injury, but all these little knick-knack injuries is common for a player at his stature, at that age, to deal with all this. I mean, all you got to do is go on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage and just take a look at what Laremy Tunsil had to go through with his knee injuries throughout the whole entire season. I mean, it's just the wear and tear of an NFL player's body. And that's where I'm getting at, John. Like, I would love to see Steven Nelson come back, but I want to see him take a lesser role. I want him to take the role that Shaq Griffin had during his first couple of weeks here. Remember, when Shaq Griffin was here, you had him as cornerback number 3. You had Steven Nelson and Darius Stingley Jr. there. That was during the time where we was looking at that cornerback group as one of the strongest positions on this team. And once Shaq Griffin, departed due to his own issues with, the franchise, that's when we really saw this team decline when it comes to their cornerback room. I just look at this from a standpoint, man. If you have an opportunity to bring Steven Nelson back, he takes a lesser role. Either you sign a stud cornerback or you draft a stud cornerback. That's going to put you in possibly an even better position than what you would have had you kept that original trio around. But, Steven Nelson, man, once again, kudos to him because that young man, every single week, he was going through something, but it did not stop him from getting on that field.
Steven Nelson is one of the few players on this team that we can't label young man.
Well, y'all age.
Born in 1993, so shout out to Nelson. But I'll say this: when Nelson was fairly healthy this year, he played well for Houston. And also think that when you look at when Stingley went down, it affected the entire secondary as well. Mm-hmm. So he's absolutely, at this point, no more than a CB2 for a team. And when I look at how this team can ascend to get to being a contending team, you look at a player like Nelson, say, hey, man, listen, come back. Let's work out a friendly deal. We got you here. We look what we were able to accomplish last year. We want to put you in a different role, maybe a reduced role, because he played a lot of snaps last year. A lot of snaps. 4 interceptions on the game, but 1 TD, did allow almost 17 yards per catch. But you look at the wear and tear, like you said, Cody, on Steven Nelson, of all of the players on the defensive side of the ball, who has more than him in the past 2 seasons? And you do want to reward a player like that, which I think that's why Nick Caserio worked out something last year. But to your point, guys, and listen to what Cody is saying, if you can add to that cornerback room and retain Steven Nelson, a guy that can be a CB3, CB4, a rotational piece, a reserve player that can come in and make plays when need be, you look at a different secondary, you're thinking to yourself now, this may be the most talented side of the ball, which is what we thought it would be before the season will start. And I think that's the best way to go. I'm an advocate of building depth, which is why we kind of talked about should Houston trade back for 23 or not. Because this team, once you make the playoffs, you start to look at how you can fill out the entire roster. And I'm sorry, I think Steven Nelson is no worse than a CB4 would be pretty good for this team. All-Star game is this weekend. Got the dunk contest, the 3-point shootout. That's going to be fun. But, of course, the All-Star game.
Wait. How you going to talk about the All-Star game and not mention the Celebrity All-Star game? I talked to CJ yesterday. He said...
Didn't he hit a home run at Travis Scott's?
It was a home run derby. Look, the young man hit 7 home runs. What is CJ made of at this point? Because later on today, we're going to see him hooping a celebrity tournament. He told me that he wasn't going to take it too serious, which is good. Pray everything be all right. But it's like, come on, man. How you going to miss the most important event at the All-Star weekend, at least for us.
You're right.
That's all I'm saying, man.
You are right.
Over
So whether you're
under
watching,
CJ 25 points.
I'll take the under. Unless
Okay.
he gets hot, because he is a shooter. But unless you're watching LeBron Duncan or whether you're watching CJ Stroud go lights out from beyond the arc, I know once you get locked into the game, you're not going to want to leave your house for any reason, especially considering that you may have sat down after a long day, got tired, but you've got to pick up something to eat, right? Didn't have time to stop. Traffic was getting to you, got irritated, got aggravated, just made it straight home. Didn't get nothing to eat, still hungry, still got to watch your boy. You can do that and take care of yourself by ordering from DoorDash. You got everything you need on the DoorDash app. Whether you want some wings, whether you want burgers, whether you want some of your local favorites, DoorDash has it all. You can get dinner for tonight, groceries for the week, or a consolation prize for your sad friends like some ice cream, all on DoorDash. DoorDash, your door to more. Head to the DoorDash app to get everything you need delivered. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, as we continue to talk Texans here on today's show. We also got to look at, I think, one of the two biggest in-season decisions made by Nick Caserio. Number one, Desmond King. Desmond King came back, and it was like, why did you cut him again? But Derek Barnett came in for the Houston Texans after being let go by the Philadelphia Eagles. And I mean, really came in at the perfect time, the right time for this franchise. Did a very good job of producing when he came in. Barnett was a guy that, when he got here to Houston, remember, him and Philly was almost over with. They were done. And when he got to the Houston Texans, 3 total sacks, 9 QB hits, 6 hurries, 10 tackles. You look at the amount of pressure that he was able to apply. Just really good for the Houston Texans.
He was in like 6 games.
6 games. 1, 2, 6 games. He was that good. Had a 2-sack game against the Tennessee Titans. Actually, all of his sacks came from Tennessee Titans. But when you look at Derek Barnett, is he a guy that for the front office for Houston do you look to retain?
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt.
Okay, we're on the same page.
And look, first of all, the mid-season addition of Derek Barnett is one of the reasons why I felt that Nick Caserio should have been at least considered for Executive of the Year. Because I don't know how you add in a mid-season, you make a mid-season move like that and have him be that crucial to your team's success. And when I look at Derek Barnett, he came here and just made an already solid and already good position group, just made it that more dominant. John, remember the game after, I think it was the first time that they played against Tennessee, and they held Derrick Henry to, I want to say, what was that crazy stat? It was like the second or the lowest,
like 1.6 yards per carry or something.
Yeah, it was like if it wasn't the second lowest of his career, it was the lowest of his career. And I remember, and I posted the interview on this show, and I wrote about it on Texans Daily over at Sports Illustrated. And I was just asking so many guys, what has been the primary reason, a primary success for the Houston Texans run defense. And of course, so many people was talking about, the defensive schemes from Coach D'Amico Ryans, giving Jacques Shazier, former defensive line coach, a lot of praise. And the players that they highlighted was guys like Sheldon Rankins, Will Anderson Jr., Malik Collins, and all this other stuff. But the one name that a lot of people kept talking about was Derek Barnett. And at that time, Derek Barnett was already, I want to say that probably was like his 3rd game, maybe 4th. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself as I'm getting my notes together, and I'm like, how in the world is Derek Barnett name is continuously being brought up as one of the guys that helped improve this run defense when at the time I don't even think he was even here for a whole entire month yet. And not only that, you also take a look at the how the Houston Texans were able to improve at getting after the quarterback, creating pressures, finishing with sacks. Because remember, at one time in the year, they was getting at the quarterback, but they wasn't completing those sacks.
Right.
Then in the second half of the season, you go out and you look up, they didn't broke the franchise record for most sacks. Majority of their sacks come in the second half of the season. And guess who was on the defensive line during the second half of the season? Derek Barnett. So just those two factors alone let me know, look, I don't care what you have to do. Well, I do kind of care what you got to do to get the deal done. But it's one of those things, John, you know, one of my favorite questions so far this offseason. How far is this at the top of the priority list? I'm not going to put it as, you know, most important, i.e. as in getting a deal done with Jonathan Grenard or getting a deal done with Dalton Schultz, but they have to make sure that they contain Derek Barnett because he is valuable on the field and the messages and everything that he's instilling, the teachings that he is instilling in these young guys. It's important off the field as well.
Super Bowl champ. I like Barnett for this team moving forward. 27. He'll be 28 by the time the season starts.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not an old guy. Like, he's been in the league since 2017. I understand that, but he's not an old guy. He's a guy that has experienced success in this league, and that's something that, you know, you want to bring to a young team, a young up and coming team, especially in a unit where you know D'Amico Ryans wants that unit to be the anchor of that defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely would love for Houston to get that deal done. Of course, you don't want Houston to overpay, but I don't think Derek Barnett would be a guy that you would have to overpay for to retain back.
No.
I don't think that's the case. And again, I just love his pedigree, what he can bring. He's been a winner for the most part since he's been in the NFL. Outside of this past year, past 2 seasons, look, when he first came into the league, 6 sacks, 3 sacks, 7 sacks, 6 sacks. So he's not like a huge sack getter, but you look at 17 stops, 13 stops, 21 stops, 24 stops. You look at forced fumbles since he came into the NFL. He's been a guy that's been pretty solid in terms of not missing tackles. So he's an all-around guy that you can use. May not even be a starter, but you can use him on this defense. And you look up, you're thinking to yourself, wow, the Texas team had 5 sacks this game. What was going on? Well, did he get a sack? Maybe he did. But did he cause some pressure, force the QB to have to step up because of the pressure he created on the edge? And then you saw your D tackle step up and make a play, or maybe your linebacker step up and make a play. That's the kind of plays that Derek Barnett can make for a team. Why do I say that? That's the kind of plays Derek Barnett made for this team whenever he was brought in after he was released from the Philadelphia Eagles. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? You ever wonder what adventure could be around the corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capability to take your next vehicle, to take your next adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into a 12.3-inch HD touchscreen system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. Or you can look at the Nissan Armada. Listen, picture this. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, my favorite part of the podcast, of course, is looking at the YouTube comments. And you guys have been commenting some very good things this week. When you look at the episode, could a defensive lineman be the Texans' biggest splash in free agency? My man Jarvis Price, 8777, said I'd go after Saquon Winfield and some depth in free agency. Then go Newton in the draft at DT or a cornerback, depending on if they are able to keep Nelson or not. Cody, your thoughts?
I actually like that. And look, the only thing I would change with that statement, I would still go after a cornerback, even if you bring back Steven Nelson. Why? Because first of all, we just finished talking about that in the first segment. But I like that idea, and I think everything that listeners and that listener and viewer just said, is one of those perfect scenarios for the Houston Texans. You go out there, you make your big splash, but at the same time, you still have an opportunity to build your depth. And John, I agree with you. I think depth should be the top priority for this team heading into the offseason while they go through their roster construction, because we saw how much depth is going to be important for a team like the Texans that's on the cusp of being part of that championship playoff contention team.
Yeah. On the episode, a lot of guys are big on the defensive tackle, Bouquet from the Ravens. A lot of people are liking that idea to bring him in. But I'm also seeing mixed emotions on bringing back DJ Reader.
I saw that too.
Yeah, I'm good on DJ Reader. I've also saw stop talking about Reader, no retreads. I've also seen some support for DJ Reader. So, and this is all on the same podcast. I'm actually with those guys, man. I think with Reader now and his age, and he suffered an injury as well. I think Houston could get better than bringing back DJ Reader.
Well, the only reason why I say DJ Reader is one of two things. One, I don't know if you're going to find too many nose tackles that's going to be better than DJ Reader outside of Chris Jones. And Chris Jones is going to cost way too much money. Plus, he just said at the parade that he isn't going anywhere.
I don't know how much that
So, I mean, yeah, to your point, you don't know. Maybe he got caught up in a moment, but I also look at it from a standpoint. Chris Jones, put it like this: if you could sign DJ Reader, and let's say he has a salary base for next season for, let's say, $14 million, Chris Jones is probably going to cost $24 million. Let's just put it like that. And then two, most importantly, yes, I understand that DJ Reader did suffer a major injury last year. However, when healthy, he is still one of the best players, in my opinion, at that position. And I just thought, at least in my opinion, it was a win-win. That would be a win-win situation for the Texans, because you get somebody that can help your interior defensive line, and at the same time, he's not going to break the bank as if you went out and signed a Chris Jones.
Yeah. New drinking game. Anytime Cody says without a shadow of a doubt, we have to drink. And that's funny. If that was an actual game, I think we'd be pretty lit on this show. A last comment from YouTube. Well, I think I like two here. This is the episode we talk about what should Houston do at the number 23 overall pick. The best running back in Texans history was undrafted. What does that mean? You guys got to let that go, man.
Let it go. That is not going to happen. But like this, if that would have happened again, we would still have Scottie Phillips a part of this team. Remember Scottie Phillips? He was an undrafted free agent. Look how that turned out. Yeah. Come on, man. Arian Foster was just a special player. He was special, plain and simple, man.
and he got his opportunity when everything else failed. I must Pandaline. Okay, shout out to you. I like how we give up on players who've only played 2 years. I don't think it's giving up on players. I think it's just looking at ways to get better. And sometimes moving on from said players is a way to get better for the franchise. And I think that may be, I don't know what player that's pertaining to, but sometimes
it must have been Dameon Pierce.
Maybe so. But I got to tell you guys, we do love Dameon Pierce as a player, as a man. We really do. But it's just the fact that Houston does have to make some tough decisions moving forward. And I think he's going to be one of those guys where you look up and, like Cody said, may not make the roster if they don't move on from him beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's it for me, guys. Yeah, we don't hate him on this show. We love him. Actually, we just always look at the better perspective for the team. Thank y'all for listening and watching to the Locked On Texas podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Follow the page on Twitter at Locked On Texans and give me a follow on Twitter as well at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.